Commence. Great. So good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock. Welcome to the Thursday, November 30th, Nantucket Conservation Meeting. Permit me to confirm that all members who are present can be heard. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Here.
Tim Brain.
Here.
Seth Engelborg.
Here.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Here.
Joe Plandowski. Joe.
Here. Here.
Thank you, Joe. And Linda Williams will be signing on shortly. This meeting is being held entirely remotely, so all participants are participating via Zoom. The public may participate via YouTube. There are directions on the town's website as to how to join. If anybody wishes to speak, please raise your hand either in your camera window or virtually and wait to be recognized by the chair. Please state your name and any relationship you might have to the project before speaking. Please keep your devices muted when you're not speaking so that you're not picked up by the recording or creating a distraction. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating via video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. We'll start the meeting with public comment on items not being heard this evening. Anybody want to weigh in on anything not being heard this evening? So seeing and hearing none, that moves us on to public hearing notice of intent. The following is continued. Lampoon Nominee Trust, 6 Westco Place, continued until December 14th. And that brings us on to North Liberty Street, LLC, 13 North Liberty Street, represented by Mark Ritz. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicants at 13 North Liberty. The commission heard this item at the last meeting. It involves a little bit of reconfiguration of an existing structure, and also there was a proposal to relocate an existing garage. I believe, Will, that the plan you've got up is the original plan we submitted, and not the revised one I sent in last week. During the hearing, we had proposed to move the garage slightly further from the wetland, and we were, I think, removing approximately 24 square feet of garage from inside the 25-foot buffer. Members of the commission asked if there was a way to do more. We went back, we took a look, we've submitted a revised plan that moves the garage as far towards the street as is possible, given a building and side lot setbacks. Currently, 190 square feet of garage is inside the 25-foot buffer. The revised plan shows the garage moved to the point where only 100 square feet is inside the 25-foot buffer. So a reduction of about 90 square feet, almost half of what's currently in the 25-foot buffer. And that is as far as we can move it given setbacks on the property. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or address any concerns.
Thank you, Mark. Commissioners? Yes, Mark.
Mark, remind me of the purpose of the move.
Basically, the applicant would just like to make the garage more accessible for use. You currently have to kind of negotiate a bit of an odd turn, make it a little bit more usable, while ultimately improving the overall site conditions. There isn't a desperate need to move it. It's on a slab foundation. This portion of the 25-foot buffer, there's a retaining wall on the north side of this property that separates the property from the wetland. So we're not proposing any work that will result in any major impacts. We're just going to pick up the garage, remove the part of, the slab that's underneath, do a new slab in the new location, and everything will still be separated from the wetland by the current fill and retaining wall. But it's mainly to make it more usable and to get it further from the wetland boundary.
Any further questions from commissioners? Seth, did you have any concerns about the deck?
No.
Okay. Then hearing no concerns from commissioners, any members of the public wish to weigh in? And seeing none, would you like to close, Mark?
Yes, please.
Do we have everything we need to close, Will?
Yes, we do.
A motion to close, please. Thank you, Joe. Seconded by Tim. Thank you, Tim. So by roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye, with Linda Williams absent. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. This brings us on to Commonwealth Wind LLC offshore linear project. Mr. Vaccaro, I believe.
Yeah. Yes, good evening, commissioners. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, may I share my screen, sir?
Please.
Right. Pat Johnson from Avangrid Renewables is here to make a few introductory comments before I present the project to the commission. So I'm going to turn this over to Pat Johnson at this point.
Thank you so much, Jack, and it's great to be with you all tonight, and great to see many familiar faces from when our company was before this commission in 2022 for the New England One Connector project. So Chair Golding, great to see you in that chair position now, and to all the other members who we worked with last year and new members, thank you for having us tonight. And you can go to the next slide. Just want to introduce my colleagues. So first, you just heard from Jack, who's a senior consultant for Epsilon Associates, our environmental consulting firm and permitting firm for this project. Also with us tonight is my colleague, Aaron Haritzi, who's the permitting manager for this project, and also Rachel Lake, who leads the community outreach for this project, is here as well, along with Aaron Lang from our outside legal team at Foley Hoag. Next slide. So I think just to orient, obviously, we always know that it causes confusion with these projects. They all have different names, some names that have changed, what the different lease areas are. So just to orient folks to this of what we're talking about. So I think most folks obviously are familiar with the Vineyard Wind or Vineyard Wind One Connector project that the Nantucket Conservation Commission granted an order of conditions to in 2019. That project has been under construction for the last several years and is the northernmost project in that kind of teal green or that green color there. Closest by proximity of its turbines to the town of Nantucket and proceeding north with cable installation between the islands and in Nantucket Sound, landing its power cables under Covell's Beach within the town of Barnstable. In May or in 2022, this commission held hearings on the Park City Wind project, also called the New England Wind One Connector project, and granted it an order of conditions that has basically a very similar pathway through a permitted offshore export cable corridor in federal and state waters between Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, landing under Craigville Beach within the town of Barnstable. And then tonight is our third and our final project that our company Avangrid owns lease area for the Commonwealth Wind project, or in this filing known as the New England Wind Two Connector project. slightly larger than the prior two, which are 800 megawatts each. This is intended as a 1,200 megawatt project, so about a third larger than the other two, and would be intended to land power cables underneath Dowses Beach in the town of Barnstable, and also sharing that same cable export corridor through federal and state waters that Jack will show in a few slides. Next slide. Just a bit about our company. I think obviously, when we're making a filing like this and proposing to do work within waters proximate to the town of Nantucket, want to make sure you have a bit of an understanding of our track record and also our experience in this area. So Avangrid is a publicly traded company. It's the third largest owner of onshore renewable projects. So that's onshore solar farms and onshore wind farms across the United States. Particularly, a lot of those, as you know, tend to be in the central and western part of the United States, but we have projects in 24 states. So we have a significant history in building renewable energy projects. We also own utility companies in New York, Connecticut, Maine, and Massachusetts. And we've been a co-owner of the Vineyard Wind project under construction now, intended to be the first large-scale commercial offshore wind project in the U.S. Since 2015, and we've been developing this succession of projects ever since. So we're a large company. We're also part owned by a large international energy company called the Iberdrola Group that has a presence all across the world. And it's the #1 wind power generator in the world. Has a significant offshore wind presence in Europe, especially a couple projects off of France, Germany, and the UK. So as a broader company, we've built a number of offshore wind projects before and have some that are in operations now. Next slide. Turn it over to Jack here.
Very good. Thank you, Pat. So the project we're going to discuss tonight is the transmission element of the New England Wind 2 project. We call it New England Wind 2 connector, and specifically that portion that's within Nantucket waters. The purpose of the project is to deliver, as Pat pointed out, 1,200 megawatts of renewable energy generated at this offshore wind facility, which is located out in federal waters some 25 miles southwest of Nantucket at its closest point. The project has numerous benefits. Most importantly, it'll result in about a 2.35 million tons per year reduction in CO2 emissions. It is part of a larger project known as New England Wind that is currently undergoing NEPA review, led by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, with many other state and federal agencies participating. Now, the transmission element of the project has been broken into two phases: New England Wind 1 connector, which you reviewed in 2022, and New England Wind 2 connector, which we are presenting this evening. The New England Wind 2 connector is also under extensive review by other state regulatory agencies, including the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, the Energy Facility Siting Board, Mass DEP, Coastal Zone Management, Cape Cod Commission, and Martha's Vineyard Commission. Now, the transmission to deliver the clean energy to shore will be accomplished with 3 offshore export cables installed within a single offshore export cable corridor, or OECC, that will make landfall and to connect to the New England electrical grid in Barnstable. A cable corridor, rather than specific cable alignments, has been defined to allow for optimization of the alignments throughout the entire route engineering process to avoid and minimize impacts and to maximize the likelihood of successful cable burial. The OECC is the same corridor that accommodates the 2 export cables of Vineyard Wind connector that were installed earlier this year, as well as the future 2 cables for the Park City Wind project. The physical characteristics of the OECC are well understood. The proponent has been coordinating with the Massachusetts Ocean Management team. Coordinating with the Massachusetts Ocean team for multiple years, with extensive marine surveys performed in the area from 2017 through 2020. The proposed project, by utilizing a common corridor, that has been evaluated by multiple regulatory bodies as a favorable route that avoids and minimizes impacts, is consistent with the Massachusetts Ocean Management Plan, which encourages the use of common corridors for infrastructure such as offshore cables. The typical width of the OECC is 3,800 feet, but it is important to note that the 3 offshore export cables are only 11 inches in diameter, and the direct trenching impact is only about 1 meter wide per cable. The roughly 3-mile portion of the OECC and Nantucket Conservation Commission jurisdiction is on the right side of the map on your screens. At its closest, the OECC boundary is 2.7 miles southwest of Muskegon Island. And as you can see, the 3 cables associated with this project, those are the yellow ones, or the gold-colored ones, are further still from Nantucket. Cable installation will have some unavoidable temporary impacts to land under the ocean and land containing shellfish, but these impacts will be minimized with appropriate construction methods and best management practices, and will meet the applicable state performance standards as well as criteria in the Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations as described in the Notice of Intent. The majority of export cables are expected to be installed using simultaneous lay and bury by jet plow or mechanical plow, the same methods as for the Vineyard Wind Connector and New England Wind 1 connector. And the typical minimal cable spacing is about 100 meters or 330 feet. This spacing will both minimize the risk of damaging previously installed cable and provide sufficient space for future maintenance or repair should that be necessary. Typical installation speeds are expected to range from about 100 to 200 meters per hour, meaning the duration will be 3 to 4 days per cable in Nantucket waters. The target burial depth for the 2 cables is 5 to 8 feet, and burial is certainly the priority. Some portions of Nantucket Sound and Muskegon Channel have areas of active sand waves, which are dynamic features that move across the seafloor. As a result, where sand waves are large, it may be necessary to perform pre-cable laying dredging to remove the tops of those features along the cable alignments to ensure sufficient burial within the underlying stable seabed. Now, not much sand wave dredging is anticipated in Nantucket waters, but project engineers estimate a dredge area of approximately 1.6 acres for all 3 cables combined. Although it is a priority to achieve adequate burial, we've included a conservative estimates for cable protection should burial prove impossible in some areas. This cable protection could be in the form of concrete mattresses, rock placement, or gabion rock bags that are described in the Notice of Intent. This protection, once in place, would be expected to function as hard bottom habitat. So I think that provides the Commission with a good introduction to the project, and I'd like to just stop there, and we're certainly available to answer any questions that you might have.
Sure. Can we have the screen back, please, Will?
Of course. Apologies.
Yeah. So, commissioners, questions? Yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions related to the layout of the cables and why there's 3. So the first is, what is the capacity for each cable, and is it possible to use a higher capacity cable? Does that exist in the industry in order to minimize the number of cables being placed? I reference this because in both of the previous projects that came before this commission, the ones referenced for Vineyard Wind and Park City Wind, we made specific findings in each of those saying that there is a potential for cumulative impact with the increased number of cables. So any effort to reduce the number of cables and put more capacity into individual cables would be welcome to this commission. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I would tell you that the two prior projects were both 800 megawatt projects, which required two cables each. This being a 1200 megawatt project explains why we need to have a third cable in this case. Also, the 11-inch diameter cable for all of these projects really is the industry standard, and is what is the commercially available product for this type of design.
It doesn't really answer my question, but I understand that there's two cables for 800 megawatts and three cables for 1200 megawatts, but the cable must have a specific voltage, right? And if there's a cable that exists that has a higher voltage, it could carry a higher load on the cable. So I don't know if there is cables that are able to have that voltage, or I guess I should start by asking what voltage is the cable being used, and if there is a alternative higher voltage cable that could carry more in each cable.
Yeah, so they're 275 kilovolt cables, which is the industry standard, given the distance from the lease area to the cable landing. I think my understanding, and I'm not an electrical engineer, is that if you increase the voltage, there are some inefficiencies potentially with electricity, moving from the lease area to the landing, given the distance. And I think at this point, this is the only voltage that's been type tested for this use at this point in time.
So, Steph, do you want to follow up, or shall I go to Joe on this? Because, I mean, it sounds as though they're giving it some thought, and that they're using what's available and have to make the channels accordingly, have to dig the channels accordingly.
Yeah, just really quickly, and I won't claim to be an electrical engineer or engineer of any sort either, but I'm just looking at a document here from a offshore export cable project in UK, and it looks like they were using 320 kilovolt cables, and they're saying that up to 525 kilovolt even exists. So if it hasn't been tested or used in the United States, I get that, but I would just hope that maybe we start to push these projects to do that testing, especially if we're going to have more and more installations in the lease area that's affected by Nantucket. We want to have the fewest amount of cables possible. And I know before too, I've said that, okay, a lot of these lease areas are under joint ownership. They should all be essentially routing the cables into one trunk line and sending that to the mainland. And I've been told that there's no infrastructure ready to accept that amount of power anywhere in the country. So part of this is not going to be solved by the Nantucket Conservation Commission. We need better power grids for offshore wind projects, but honestly, people don't care about investing in infrastructure. They only care in investing in generation. So we're not going to solve that today, but it is important that we make an effort to reduce the number of cables by any chances that we have available to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Joe, I believe you had your hand up before Linda.
I did. And I had a comment, and that is, I'm just surprised this group or any other group could get as much done as they've gotten done, going through all the hurdles that I read about as I went through some of these documents to get approval. I mean, there's a massive number of organizations, governmental and otherwise, to get anything done. Surprised they've gotten as far as they've gotten.
Yes. I think everybody understands the bureaucracy has expanded at a exponential rate in this country over the last 30 years. So, Linda, do you have a question? And for our
Yeah,
for the minutes, Linda, do you know what time you joined us?
yeah,
Otherwise,
just when this started, right at the beginning of this.
okay, thank you. Let's call it 5:15 then.
What, I'm just totally, I don't know about cables. I don't know about generation of power. I don't have an aversion to wind power. I've seen it in Scotland. What I was curious about, if you don't know, then don't answer it. When I was out at a rather stellar, very odd sunset last night, it was very difficult to get a picture at all without two towers. Is that part of this group, and are those the closest one to us and everything else is beyond that? I was stunned that could see them so clearly, not with my camera, but with my naked eye. And I usually need glasses to see that far. Are those the closest ones to us, part of this project, or is that the other project? What are those things? There are two of them there I could see.
I'm not sure what direction you were looking in, and I'm sorry, but
Southwest, not a
I'm not
problem,
sure.
southwest.
I didn't hear where you were exactly on the island either.
Cisco, looking southwest.
I see. So chances are what you probably saw was some of the construction activities that are associated with the Vineyard Wind project. And that's the project that's in the most northern or closest to Nantucket of the three projects that Patrick put up on the screen earlier. There are no towers in place that are associated with either the New England Wind 1 or New England Wind 2 projects, which are much further to the south.
That's what
Thank
I
you.
thought. Those would be much farther out than these two.
Yes.
Thank you, Linda. And a thing of beauty, I was out there recently and I think it's glorious to see them being constructed. But I do have I'm curious as to, in the split screen that you showed with the enlarged map, where you have Edgartown to the left or to the west and Nantucket's jurisdiction to the east, and where you have what appears to be a corridor that was entirely within the Edgartown jurisdiction. I'm curious why you didn't follow that line rather than coming across into the Nantucket jurisdiction.
Right.
Not that it has any direct bearing on this process, but
Would you like me to share the screen again so that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See if I can quickly find that slide. There.
That's the one. Thank you.
So you are referring to this.
Yes.
So that we call the Western Muskeget variant. And that corridor has also been vetted as a possible alternative to the preferred corridor, which takes us into Nantucket waters here. It may be necessary, in fact, to shift one of these cables over to the Western Muskeget variant if it is determined during the installation that there's insufficient room for that. But the preferred installation for all of these three cables is to come into Nantucket waters. The Western Muskeget variant is there as a fallback position if necessary.
So is that because of different bottom? Or?
Yes, different bottom, different current. It's just a much more difficult installation along the Western Muskeget variant, but it is technically feasible. So it's there as an alternative. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For satisfying my curiosity. And now, are there any further questions from commissioners or? Yes, Tim.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what are the odds that there will be repairs or maintenance or so on these cables? And if so, if that were to happen, how does that work?
And if we could get the screen back, please.
Oh.
Thank you.
Right. So the hope is, of course, that these cables, once installed, will be forever, well, not forever, but for the life of the project in place and not require any maintenance. However, there are ample design design considerations that have been incorporated that would allow for a ship or ships to anchor around these cables and perform whatever maintenance is required. I mentioned during my presentation, for instance, the placement of cable protection, and if insufficient burial was if sufficient burial was not achieved in certain locations. So the same might apply, for instance, if there was a condition that where the cable became exposed, or even if there was a section of the cable where there was determined to be insufficient burial after a significant storm event. The cable would be monitored, its depth would be known, and if necessary, cable protection could be added at a later date. So there is one of the reasons why you see the third cable in this project is off a bit on its own. That's to provide the necessary anchor spread for that type of operation.
Can I ask, how are they monitored?
Liz, would you like to answer that? I'm sorry, Erin, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, they they are continuously monitored.
How does that work?
Pat, do you know how they're
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Love to talk about that. So all of our infrastructure, the cables, the turbines, the offshore substation, the components within Barnstable for all the projects have a what's called a SCADA monitoring, and it's a 24/7 remote monitoring of all that infrastructure via fiber optic cables that are within the entire system. Currently, for the Vineyard Wind project, is they're preparing to electrify that whole system and start having those first couple. I think there's about 3 turbines that are fully up and ready to go for Vineyard Wind right now. That'll start operations, and then a facility in Portland, Oregon that our company owns will be the remote monitoring location for all of that infrastructure, and we're monitoring for any temperature change of any piece of infrastructure, any type of malfunction, and if anything ever malfunctioned or seemed off, the computer systems would trigger that immediately, shut off the relevant pieces of infrastructure until it could be visually monitored, or any type of maintenance would need to happen. Our company also has plans for actually this project to build a companion monitoring facility, which is, you think of like a state-of-the-art control room type facility, is slated for New Bedford, Massachusetts, would be a companion backup facility for that facility we already have up and running in Oregon, to help monitor these offshore wind projects and also our other renewable energy projects that Avangrid owns across the country. So that's the benefit of having that remote monitoring, is if something malfunctions, we can isolate. If there's a certain section of cable, or if it was a system-wide issue, then we could shut down the entire operation all remotely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So, Mark?
Actually, Mike was ahead of me. If he wants to go first, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's really just a question more to satisfy my curiosity. So the wind turbines bring the power back to the mainland and then it just gets distributed into the grid? Is that how that works? And just, well, kind of a silly question, but does any of it make its way back to Nantucket, or it all depends on how the grid flows?
That's exactly the case. It really depends on how the grid flows. The electrons could certainly make their way back to Nantucket, but they could just as easily make their way up to Portland, Maine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We should tap the cable maybe.
But go ahead, Mark, your question?
Yes, thank you. My question is, and Mr. Kaiser is on the call, I see, and knows a great deal more about Muskegon Channel than I do, but I was wondering, I can envision a situation where this being a very dynamic sand moving area with shifting shoals on a regular basis, if a cable becomes exposed, and it will probably be actually visible in some certain cases on the right circumstances, but even if not, what do you do?
Right. Well, the sand waves that you're describing, they are real and quite significant, really, in Nantucket Sound, but also present in Muskegon Channel. They can be quite large, and so the idea of the dredging that I mentioned earlier is to allow the cable burial equipment to install below the sand wave to get into the stable seabed, so that as the sand wave moves across the bottom, the trough of that sand wave is the target burial depth is based on the trough of the sand wave, not the midpoint or the crest of the sand wave. You understand? It's important that the cable not become exposed and be exposed off the bottoms as you described. So that's the intent, is to allow the sand wave to pass over the cable as it moves along the seabed without exposing it.
Thank you.
So following up on that, has there been any monitoring of the sand waves and to see their formation and their station?
I'm not sure we could call it monitoring, Mr. Chairman, but there have been, several snapshots of the sand waves over time, and we can see some of these waves are, 12, 15 feet high, and they might move a meter a day. So they're, it's a very dynamic environment and challenging for installation, but the engineers have looked at it and they've come up with a system of installation. In fact, the installation has been applied. The methodology has been applied for the recently installed Vineyard Wind Connector project.
Thank you. Mike, do you have a follow-up before Joe?
Yes, just one final question. If you do get to the point where you have to dredge to get past the sand wave, where does the dredge end up? Does it just get dispersed per side, or does the dredge get taken on board and dispersed somewhere else?
Yeah, great question. So the idea would be to gather that dredge material, and usually a hopper dredge would be used for this type of thing. The sand would then be transported basically by that same vessel several hundred meters to another area where there are active sand waves and disposed of there. And then that material would be naturally redistributed and become part of that wave field.
Thank you. Joe?
Yes, my question relates to the Barnstable folks raising hell about those cables showing up on their shores. What happens if they win?
Yeah, I can probably take that. Thanks for the question, Joe. So we've been working with the town of Barnstable and the residents there, especially in the villages of Centerville and Osterville, where the relevant projects are proposed to land for a number of years now. So really the original story with this is Vineyard Wind proposed to go into the town of Yarmouth, and then really was invited to come into the town of Barnstable to land at Covell's Beach for that project, signed a host community agreement. And then we did the same for the New England Wind One Connector, Park City Wind Project for Craigville Beach, signed a host community agreement with the town in May of 2022. And then I think this third project landing in Osterville, another village of Barnstable, sparked a little bit of opposition within the town. And there's been, as folks read things and things circulate on Facebook, there's been more and more, just concern questions, folks getting involved. So there certainly has been, especially as the New England Wind One Connector project has been advancing in its final stages of permitting recently, some more folks rising up in opposition. But I think we have a really good track record and working relationship with the town. I will continue to want to figure things out in terms of any disagreements or concerns raised by residents, answer those questions. We hold monthly open houses in the town of Barnstable to have those conversations, and we'll continue to do so. So I think, like a lot of things, sometimes, obviously you've seen it, so many things on the island, sometimes opposition forms to something coming before town meeting, some of that happening in Barnstable. But I think we have a lot of built up goodwill and with folks in that community, and I'm sure we're going to be able to figure it out.
Thank you.
Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As an aside, I happened to be in Osterville yesterday, and I certainly saw a lot of the signage that you're talking about, but that is not within our purview today. We're really just here to talk about the section of cable that's in the Nantucket water. I would say, though, that I'm a bit concerned about the description of the dredging, and I was wondering if we could get some more details on that, because specifically in our local wetland regulations, we have a few different performance standards about dredging, and some of the requirements are that dredge materials don't transport pollutants, they don't smother bottom habitat, they don't cause issues to marine species. So I was wondering, first, is the dredge material tested for pollutants and monitored? And then second is, are the areas that the dredge material is going to be deposited, before it is deposited, is there any type of marine life survey in that area showing that this is a safe spot to deposit, and we're not depositing it out on a sea clam habitat or whatever it may be? Because I get the need to dredge, but I think that we need to make sure that we're not accidentally causing impacts with that dredge material. Thank you.
So there is quite a lot of information on the dredging aspects of the project in the notice of intent application, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if everybody's had a chance to look at the NOI. I know it was pretty voluminous filing, and perhaps it was overlooked, but we could certainly bring out that information a bit more in a separate submittal if you feel it's necessary. I will say this about the potential for impact to sea clams and other mollusks that might be inhabiting the seabed in these areas where the sand waves occur. Generally, it's not good shellfish habitat in sand waves. Shellfish generally like more stable seabeds. You can imagine where the sand is moving at that rate. It doesn't really provide a good burrowing habitat, let's say, for mollusks. So that's just one side that I'd like to point out there. But we can, like I said, we can certainly bring out some of this information and submit it separately if you feel it's needed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Seth.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. And maybe Pete will tell me I'm wrong when he finally speaks, but George's Bank is one of the most dynamic bottom habitats in the North Atlantic, and it's a productive sea clam area. The sand there changes all the time. I mean, I've read research studies of huge changes in the dynamics of the bottom there. So
right, I'm not saying that there aren't any sea clams out there. It's just that the areas where the dredging would occur is very, very different from the gaps, let's say, that occur between the sand waves.
Thank you.
And so with a drum roll, I believe Pete Kaiser would finally, his patience is rewarded. Good evening, Pete. And you're muted.
How's that?
That's good.
Got it? Good. Thank you. So anyway, I just was informed about this yesterday. So I've been rallying around trying to refresh my memory. We have certain things from the first notice of intent and order of conditions that Lauren and myself actually worked on. I seen her a little while ago. And I just want to say that there's certain things in there that should be applied to this permit if and when it gets approved. And one of the major things that I was concerned about, I've been involved with dredging, or not dredging, but towing the sleds, you know, the video sleds and doing the bottom grabs and benthic, you know, monitoring and stuff like that. So this area out there definitely is highly active. You know, these sand waves, they'll move. I'm not sure at a, you know, as fast as he was saying, but that's a lot of shallow, light sand. It does move. So if in that area, after every big storm, I would recommend, I don't know how they can put it in there, that this cable does get monitored. And it's not about the breaks in it, but it's about the depth at which it is. And there you can do that with certain, you know, certain gear. So, you know, just to make sure that all of a sudden this wave's not moving and this thing's only a foot under the ground. And if you got a sea clamor that goes in there, he'll blow a foot of sand away from that and hang up on it. If it does hang up on, then you got a mess. So, but anyway, back to that order of conditions that we put through on the first one. I think they should apply to this group. They just, yeah. The monitoring, they could do that, monitor it after every big storm to see that it's not exposed. If they are, I guess what they're going to do is have to use the rock of the gabion bags, those cages of rocks that would sit over top. And that's what was discussed when they were going to do the other one. This dredge material, I guess would be a good thing if they could find some area in there by doing some bottom grabs, like core samplings to see what's there. A lot of this stuff, it looks like just sand, but again, you know, there's things like sand eels. They live in that sand. There's a lot of stuff that lives in that sand. But anyway, if they could locate some areas where they could dump that stuff, but check it out ahead of time. Make sure there's not a lot of benthic activity going on there. Oh, let's see. One of the things that I discussed with Pat there, and I'm not sure if it's been done yet, but when it was first applied for, you know, it came through to your own admittance or the Vineyard Wind that they were going to be destroying some clam beds, destroying some mussel beds, interrupting with the squid, you know, the squid mops when their event happens in the summer for spawning. And it was like, basically it was an open book saying, all right, we're going to do all this. And would that be okay? And I said, look, not only no, but hell no. Not without some compensation possibly for the damage that's going to be done to that bottom, that benthic community. So before it's done, I'd like to see a video pre and post the construction. Now, I don't know if they did it on this last one, the pre one, I haven't seen it, but especially after, it's supposed to be done within 60 days. So you can witness the actual damage to where that cable is. And if so, it comes up this question of mitigation. I mean, admittedly, the group said they were going to tear the bottom up here and there, going to have this interaction. So I know there was some monies that were given under this good, I think it was a good neighbor agreement with Mariah Mitchell and that group and the town. There were three parties and the historical group. Now, when that all started, I was pretty upset because we've been getting beat up around here from the squid boats, the sea clammers, and we're one of the only areas in Massachusetts that doesn't have the protection that these other coastal communities have. So anyway, I would like to make sure that somebody who's well versed at it, that could estimate what kind of damage was done, and then some sort of a mitigation fund that we could use for, again, either an artificial reef, with the aggregate, and it would give these, the fish that come through there, like I say, sand eels, stuff like that. That's where they live, in a lot of those sandways. They're in there. They move, it's good for them. But anyway, that's one thing that I would hope to be established, because the original monies that supposedly went to the town, none of that is earmarked for any, revegetate the eelgrass beds. Again, artificial reef seems like it would be a good thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll cut it right there and just see what goes on here.
Well, you got a lot of subjects, and
Believe me, I'm well versed in this whole thing. We helped put the electric company cable across.
Yeah.
And so I'm well versed in how that works. As far as 1 meter of disruption, you're going to bury that thing 5 to 8 feet down. It's going to be more like, I bet you, a 10-foot, disruption. And at 3 miles, you got 18,000 feet. That's a long ways and a lot of disruption. So I want to make sure that it's taken care of.
Yeah, I think everybody hears your concerns loud and clear. And you've asked quite a few questions there. And Mr. Vaccaro, do you feel like replying? Or shall I ask Seth if he has further questions?
I would just like to say it might be some comfort to everyone to hear that part of the reviews that the project's undergoing at the state and federal level, there is a very active development of a benthic habitat monitoring plan that'll be incorporated as part of the project. Now it's in draft stage now, but it's being developed in consultation with DMF and other agencies. Basically, it's provides for pre-construction baseline survey, monitoring of control sites, post-construction monitoring years 1, 3, and possibly 5 if recovery is not observed by year 3. There'll be 10 monitoring sites, 2 sites in each of the 5 habitat types that have been identified, and 2 control sites for habitat types. And the methods include grab samples, multi-beam, depth sounder, and underwater video. So there is a plan that's being developed to address many of the concerns that Mr. Kaiser has brought up. And these are legitimate concerns, and the agencies realize that. So we're working towards that goal.
So yes, we had a similar discussion over Vineyard Wind, and I don't remember ever seeing any monitoring reports afterwards. Will, this was before your time. Do you know whether anything filtered through?
I'd have to verify with Jeff on that one, Ian.
Yeah, so I'd be curious. Linda, did you pitch in? I guess not. So Seth, sorry, I forgot that you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Wetlands Protection Act lays out a process for, the best routes to protect wetlands in Massachusetts. The best is to conserve. Obviously, this project by design is not doing that. It's creating an impact. The second is to restore. And as far as I read the notice of intent, that's not really proposed here either. The area that the offshore export cables are going in are, there's going to be the impact, and they're saying it's temporary, which I agree with, but there's no effort to actively restore that habitat after they do the installation. And then the third is mitigate. And I think this is sort of what Pete's getting at, but mitigation is only supposed to be used when conservation and restoration can't be done at the project site. And for this reason, given the nature of the project, it's reasonable to believe that you can't conserve or restore because the cables have to go there. But I don't think there's been enough emphasis on mitigation. So if habitat is being destroyed in this offshore export cable corridor, then mitigation of additional habitat should be required. And if you look at what our local wetland regulations say, there's two performance standards in land under the ocean about dredging. They're number 1 and 2. I'm not going to read them, but it's available online. And there's 8 about water dependent projects, that they shouldn't cause any adverse impacts on wildlife, erosion control, marine fisheries, shellfish beds, storm damage prevention, flood control, recreation, and aquatic vegetation. And I think everybody agrees, whether you're the applicant, permitting board, somebody who's a proponent of this project, and opponent, I think everyone agrees that the impacts are real. And I think we, as a commission, need to require that the impact of that cable within the Nantucket corridor are mitigated with restoration or restored or mitigated with the creation of additional habitat somewhere else in the Nantucket waters. And I think that that's not just a desire, that's our duty. Our wetland regulations require us to do that. They require us to minimize adverse impacts. And one way we can minimize adverse impacts is by, providing an alternate source for those wildlife to go. So I think we should do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Mr. Vaccaro, would you like to take that under advisement?
Yes, I would. I would just say also that, we do expect this project will have impacts, but we feel though strongly that those impacts are temporary, and that the habitat will naturally restore in a relatively short period of time. Hopefully the benthic habitat monitoring that the project is committing to will prove that ultimately to this commission, and you'll agree that no further restoration or mitigation is necessary.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Just to add to what Jack said, and Pete and I have known each other a long time and had a lot of conversations about this. And we had a very similar conversation on mitigation during the New England Wind One Connector hearing process last year. I think it's well known that our company has a good neighbor agreement with the town of Nantucket, and also with the Nantucket Preservation Trust and the Mariah Mitchell Association. I think some really positive news recently that the community foundation that's managing that money has put out something in the Inky Mirror on November 10th that a good deal of funds are available. Some has already been committed to town projects, Mariah Mitchell and NPT projects, but quite a bit of money is available now and is going to continue to be available via the Vineyard Wind One project, the Park City Wind project, the Commonwealth Wind project, and a couple future projects as well. So what we discussed last year, and I think continues to be a very sensible way to handle this, is Pete and others have some very, I think, strong ideas of artificial reef projects. Similar one that he's very familiar with in Harwichport has been successful, that the town could use those funds to create and site where appropriate to create new habitat at places of its choosing around the island, and that would make a lot of sense. So the way the Good Neighbor Agreement is set up, we provide the money to the fund managed by the Community Foundation. There's a board of town officials, Mariah Mitchell officials, NPT officials. Our company has one non-voting member, Rachel Pachter, on that board. We'd certainly be willing to support, particularly any efforts that Pete or other groups on the island might do to especially look at artificial reef projects. But certainly that's a very a sensible way that's within the powers of the town to address this issue and involve local fishermen like Pete and others who care about the health of the inshore waters.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I really do personally support the Good Neighbor Agreement and think that a lot of productive output is going to come from that. But it's important to remember that the Conservation Commission process and that process are inherently separate processes. And when we grant permits, it's incumbent on us to require the applicant to tie the restoration or mitigation of the impacts to the permit itself. So there would need to be something tied in the order of conditions that requires the applicant to either do the mitigation themselves or pay for the mitigation. We don't say it can't be contracted out, but in all honesty, the Good Neighbor Agreement is outside of our process, and we need to make sure that the impacts created here are also being handled here. That's simply how the Wetlands Protection Act and Nantucket local regulations work. Thank you.
Thank you. Pete, do you have anything to add that hasn't been touched on, or can we move on? And you're muted again, and you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, you got me?
Yeah.
Okay. So definitely, when this all began with the first windmill thing, we were under the understanding that a lot of these monies were going to be, X amount of the monies were going to be earmarked for the restoration of the damage that was done. And again, the Benthic community is a tough decision on to what degree it's done. Now, so the first thing that everybody's talking about is definitely separate from the monies that are given to the town, which is used by Mariah Mitchell and the other one. Separate from that, there should be monies to restore, again, put it into the eelgrass, put it into artificial reefs that does attract, hard bottom does attract fish. So anyway, I want to make sure that some of this is done. Everybody got a little pissed about that when they found out, saying, oh, none of that money's done.
All right,
so anyway, I'll leave
you.
that be. I'll leave that be.
Okay.
But I want to make sure
we're in agreement here.
Okay.
Thank you for emphasizing that.
Yes,
and,
sorry about that.
Not at all. But would you please put your hand down if you are finished? Okay, good man. Thank you. So, Mr. Corey Gamil, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Close enough. Thank you. Real quick, local fisherman. I might have missed this. Who's determining where the money is? It the Concom? Is it select board? When money is appropriated to the town, who's making the decision how it's cut up?
And that's a very good question. The answer is I don't know, and does anyone know?
Because that's the question we need to get after before we can say who's responsible for what.
And yeah, and Pete said yes. Go ahead, Seth.
Yes, I mean, I know how the Good Neighbor Agreement operates, but I think the question that the comment I was trying to make before really is that that's a separate process that needs to be distinct from our process, because, in other projects, like let's just say you apply for building a house in a bordering vegetated wetland. Under the Wetlands Protection Act, you are legally not allowed to pay for mitigation offsite. You're required for all your restoration or mitigation to be on site. And we need to hold this project to the same standards. We need to make sure that mitigation for the project or restoration of the project is couched in the order of conditions. The Good Neighbor Agreement is great, but it really is separate from what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And that's
Mr. Chairman.
Orders of conditions are going to be very important. And who is addressing me?
Yes, it's Jack Vaccaro here.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I feel it's necessary to make a just a quick statement here. We are not building a house in a bordering vegetated wetland, obviously. This is a very different project. It's a renewable energy project that is by statute, by regulation rather, considered a limited project, which is an entirely different category of projects. And I would just remind the commission that the rules that would apply to house construction in a bordering vegetated wetland are not the same for this type of activity.
Point taken, sir.
Thank you.
And Mike, do you have
Thank you,
any-
Mr. Chairman. Just a quick comment, and I'm certainly not an authority on it, but it's more to address Corey's question. I would think money that goes to the town just goes into the general fund, so that would not earmark it, for specific reef projects or something like that. So that's just where I've seen monies go into the town before. They could end up just like the electricity anywhere.
Yeah,
Right.
I just think it's important that I just would love that
Excuse
question
me,
answered.
Mr. Gamble, would you?
Sorry about that.
I just wanted to make a point before you continue talking that I think, Will, we need to task you with seeing how we can take these points into account to where the orders of conditions might be able to structure it that way. So rather than the money going directly to the town, I don't know whether that's possible or not. So thank you, Mr. Gamble, for letting me interrupt you. Please go ahead.
No worries. I apologize if I jumped in. I just, just looking to get that, and I understand if no one here has the answer to that question. I just think that's something that I know it's not Concom's question to answer, but you guys are a conduit to somebody else who can get that answer. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. So would you, Mr. Vaccaro, would you like to continue or?
It seems we're headed towards a continuance, Mr. Chairman. I have on my punch list here really just the question raised by Commissioner Engelberg about the dredging, so we can provide you with some supplemental information on that front. Was there something else that I'm missing? I think that was it.
I don't think so, unless any further questions that need to be answered. I think that's an important one. And so on that note,
right.
Would you like to continue until December 14th?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us on to the Nantucket Land Bank, 9 Winoma Way. Rachel Freeman.
Hi, thank you very much. I have not received communication from Natural Heritage. I'm sorry, I didn't figure that out until tonight. May we please continue?
Okay.
Thank you.
The 14th?
Yes, please.
All right. So noted. And
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And so this brings us on to I Am and Tommy LLC, 77 Eel Point Road. Brian Madden. Good evening, Brian.
Mr. Chair, I'll be recused from this.
Okay. So that's Seth Engelborg recused. Okay.
Good evening. Yes, I think that may take the cake for most interesting LLC name. But the proposed project involves replacement beach stairs. There's currently a set of aluminum beach stairs that cantilever over the coastal bank down to the coastal beach. There's flood zone at the toe of the slope. Relatively stabilized bank there you can see in the photographs with American beach grass primarily along the face. Pretty standard design in the wooden set of stairs that are being proposed. We have the typical profile shown with the mid landing. The wooden set of stairs is going to be supported by helical piles. driven in to minimize site disturbance. Again, it's going to be elevated 12 to 18 inches off the bank surface, and relatively standard design that's been approved on other recent projects. And the toe of the slope is actually located within priority habitat, so we still are waiting on natural heritage, which we expect at by the next meeting. But I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So, Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, did you get the natural heritage sign off on this?
I did not on that one, Ian, my bad.
Okay, no, not at all. So any questions from commissioners? And any questions from members of the public? So then I guess we'll be continuing, Brian.
Yes, to the 14th, please.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you. So that brings us on to Creekside Nominee Trust, 156 Orange Street, Mark Ritz.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be recused from 156 Orange, please.
Okay.
Good evening.
I will as well, Mr. Chairman. I was contacted about this the other day and I don't know what they want from me, so I'm going to recuse just on the off chance.
Okay. Thank you both. So go ahead, Mark.
Once again, Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicants at 156 Orange. This project has two components. I'll go over what I hope is the simpler one first. On the south side of this property, there is a lined pond as well as a small pond and wetland system, which crosses over onto the abutting property as well. The natural wetland system there currently contains quite a bit of Phragmites and loosestrife. The applicant would like to remove the invasive species using clip and drip with a licensed applicator to basically get rid of the loosestrife and the Phragmites. We're not proposing any additional work, dredging, anything like that, just a clip and drip for that component. The second component of the project is on the north side of the existing house, on an area that is existing patio and altered area on that portion of the house. The applicant would like to put in a swim spa, basically a therapeutic, one of those lap type swim spas. This is not going to be in ground. This is going to be a prefabricated swim spa, just placed on top of the ground surface, kept covered when not in use with one of those attachable covers. And it is, so it's not an in-ground structure. It's basically a temporary, prefabricated structure placed at grade, no excavation, no significant alteration to the resource. I'd be happy to address any questions or concerns from the commission.
Thank you, Mark. So, commissioners? Yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the chance to go and see the property at the site visit this week. And I understand that the waiver being applied for is the no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative. And I think it's obvious from looking at the site and looking at the plan that several reasonable alternatives do exist on the property. If you look at the plan again, actually, Will, could you please put the plan back up? So in the area that structure already exists, there's the deck above enclosed porch. A spa could certainly go there. There's a covered porch. A spa could certainly go there. There's a porch on the south, south side of the dwelling. A spa could certainly go there. And there's areas in the side yards they were like elevated up and landscaped out, that a spa could certainly go there. You know, maybe this exact configuration of the spa that's proposed wouldn't fit, or maybe would only fit in a few of those places. But a materially similar project that accomplishes a spa on site is certainly possible at this property, and I think would be a reasonable alternative. And if you look at what our waivers requirements actually say, you know, the waiver being requested is that it's the burden of the proof of the applicant to show that no reasonable alternative exists. And I don't see anything about alternatives in this this submission, and I would just request that before I move forward, we get alternative analysis that indicates why a spa of that size and shape, or maybe of a different shape that's materially similar, can't go in any of the other proposed locations that I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Mark, would you like to take that into account?
Yes, we can certainly speak with our client and get their feedback on some of those potential locations.
Great. And any further questions from commissioners? And yes, Mark.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman Golding. I just would support each Seth's comments that I think they should seriously explore some alternative sites for it. I think that's a very reasonable request to make in terms of the waiver request. Thank you.
And I noticed a thumbs up from Tim on that as well. So, all right. So, Mark Ritz, would you like to continue until December 14th?
Yes, please, and we'll provide the commission with additional information. Thank you.
Thank you. So that moves us on to 2 Cathcart Nominee Trust, 2 Cathcart Road. And Mark, you're up again.
Once again, Mark Ritz representing the applicants at 2 Cathcart Road. The project before you is a residential development of an existing property. This was a large property that was subdivided, and the applicant is proposing to construct a single-family residence, pool, cabana, and some retaining walls. All proposed structures will be outside of the 50-foot buffer. There's this orange silt fence line represents the proposed limit of work. Greater than 50% of native vegetation will remain in place between the 25-foot and 50-foot buffer zone. There is no grading or any structure that's inside the 50-foot buffer zone. With that, I'll be happy to address any questions or concerns.
Thank you. Any questions? So, there's no 2-foot groundwater issue here?
Our wetland is down at an elevation of approximately 8 or so, with seasonal high groundwater down between 6.5 and 7. And our proposed pool finished elevation is 20 on the plan. So
the depth is what?
Yeah, so with the retaining walls and all that, the structures are going to be considerably higher up, so we shouldn't have any groundwater issues.
Okay. So we're not talking a 12-foot Olympic pool, obviously.
No.
Okay. So any questions from commissioners or members of the public? And would you like to close?
Yes, please.
And Will, I believe we have everything to close. We need to close.
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Motion to close, please. Thank you, Mark. Seconded by Joe. And so by roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Beth Engelbold,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Pandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mark. And so this brings us on to 96 Squam Road LLC, 96 Squam Road. And Art Gasparo. Good evening, Art.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm before the commission tonight with a notice of intent to construct a single-family dwelling within the buffer zone to a border and vegetated wetland. This structure had actually been approved as part of an earlier order of conditions that had expired and actually been issued a certificate of compliance related to the structure that you see that exists on the property. They, at the time, built the smaller garage and never built the house. And now we're back with an application to construct the main house and put a small shell parking area in. None of the structural elements are within the 50-foot buffer zone, and there's no disturbance within the 25-foot buffer zone. We have asked for a waiver for the 2-foot separation distance to groundwater. However, I wanted to just provide the commission some detail on that. When there's an existing septic system, it's not shown on this plan. It's outside of the 100-foot buffer zone, and it's already been installed, which has adequate capacity for both of these structures. And when we were doing the soil testing for that, we found redoxamorphic features, essentially signs of high groundwater, which Title V requires us to hold as a groundwater elevation at a few feet deep. But the actual groundwater that was observed when those soil tests were done was down at 13.5 feet. So I believe that this is a situation where the groundwater is actually down deeper, and it's just the colorations in the soils. I don't think that I believe that if we were to hold the actual groundwater elevation, the observed groundwater, the bottom of our footings would be 4 feet above that observed elevation. But I wanted to request the waiver on the basis that the groundwater for the septic system nearby was based on the redoxamorphic features. I think that, and I hope the commission will agree that in this case, you could either decide that the groundwater is at that deeper level and the waiver isn't required, or I more conservatively requested the waiver to have that discussion and leave it at the discretion of the commission. And I believe that without the actual flowing groundwater, the type of soils that we have out there in Squam, it's more of a tight sandy loam, that there's not going to be any impact from having a basement that, again, the footings would be 4 feet above the observed groundwater. And I know it's kind of technical, but I think that that's sometimes what we get into in these Squam sites. You can see I've put spot elevations on the plan. Our top of foundation would be around elevation 35. The wetland itself is down at 28, 60 feet further away. And again, in the soil tests that had been done were located just to the east of the structure that's proposed outside of your jurisdiction. So the rest of the application is essentially, it's being constructed within an existing lawn area that had been permitted as part of the earlier project that is referenced by the DEP file number on the plan for the wetland boundary, and has a certificate of compliance. And with that, I'd be happy to address questions or concerns that you might have with the application.
Thank you, Art. So, commissioners, questions? And no, seeing none, I believe. So is that an acceptance that the waiver should be granted, or that no waiver is necessary? Seth?
I think we should just proceed with the waiver. The alternative would be to get another soil survey showing that the soil's there, but that seems like a lot of work and effort. I do see though that the long-term net benefit waiver was applied for, and I think we should apply the no adverse impact, no reasonable alternatives, because I'm not sure if this is actually a net benefit here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And any further questions or questions from members of the public? And Art, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
And Will, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, we do.
So motion to close. Would thank you, Joe, and seconded by Mike. So by roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Beth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Pandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
So that brings us on to amended orders of conditions. Doherty, ACK, LLC, 4 Mariner Way, and also 6 Mariner Way.
Yes, remember, Mr. Chairman, I've recused from both of these.
I'd forgotten, Linda. Thank you for reminding me. So, Paul Santos. Paul, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. On behalf of the property owner and applicant Doherty ACK LLC, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors, before you tonight to discuss an amended order of conditions request for the installation of a pool elevated above grade within land subject to coastal storm flowage in the buffer zone to an isolated vegetated wetland for 4 Mariner Way. This is actually the second hearing, I believe, for this particular application. We were before you at last 2 weeks ago, and we discussed the proposal at some length, received some input from the from abutters, comments from the Nantucket Land and Water Council, and subsequent to that, I submitted a supplement to the application with regard to a few different items and made some proposed amendments to the application as originally submitted. Just as a refresher, this the resource areas we are talking about is land subject to coastal storm flowage. There is also an isolated vegetated wetland located off locus at 111 Washington Street. The wetland is subject to jurisdiction under the local bylaw. It does not meet any of the wetland definitions under the act and is subject to jurisdiction, again, under the local bylaw only. The supplement that I submitted basically went into a little bit more detail on the actual flood zone that we are in. We are located within an AE zone with an elevation 8. There was comments from the Nantucket Land and Water Council with regard to research that had been completed, and it spoke specific to wave heights and things of that nature. And what I sought to do in the amendment was to give some detail on the particular AE zone. Just as a refresher, the 100-year flood elevation or FEMA flood zones, you have a velocity zone, you then have these AE zones, and then within the AE zones, they have a areas defined as limit of moderate wave action. So we are not in the V zone, we are in an AE zone, and we are not within an area designated as limited or moderate wave action. And I think that's important with regard to, there was comments about 3-foot wave heights and how these pools can withstand what's happening within this particular flood zone. Again, we're in the AE zone. We're in the far reach of the AE zone. We are not within an area of limited to moderate wave action. The limit of moderate wave action is a zone which the local building inspector has the ability to apply the V zone standards if in fact the property is particularly located within that zone. This map here is a blow up of the actual zone itself. What you'll see is the V zone, which is designated by a white line, The moderate wave action is a line, a black line with a triangle nomenclature following it. And then the remainder area is the AE zone. We are located within the AE zone, outside of that area of moderate wave action. The application before you originally was submitted that had a pool size of 18 and 1.5 feet inches long by 9 feet and 1.5 inches wide. The current proposal reduces that to 15 feet long by 9 foot 1.5 inches wide, and that sits within the confines of an elevated deck. There was some discussion with regard to the bottom of the pools and how far they would sit above the existing grade. As originally proposed, they were 6 inches above grade. We have agreed to and committed to setting the bottom of the pools 12 inches above grade, which was discussed at the previous meeting. To kind of review how these pools are basically set, pool would be supported by an engineered foundation system consisting of 4 helical piles set 25 to 30 feet deep, anchoring 4 concrete piers, elevated on a elevated grade beam. The bottom of the pool would be set at elevation 6, which would be approximately 12 inches above existing grade. Top of the pool would be set approximately at elevation 10.5 or 5.5 feet above existing grade. And then that would be 2.5 feet above the flood elevation of 8. So the dwelling to be constructed based on FEMA regulations in the 9th edition of the Massachusetts Building Code, because we're in an AE zone, elevation 8, first floor would have to be set at an approximate or set at elevation 9. So there's a 1 foot freeboard, if you would, built into the 9th edition of the building code. Because it's in an AE zone, the main foundation could be set on a concrete foundation. No basement would be allowed, and the requisite flood vents, standard flood vents, would be set throughout the existing foundation. The remainder of the application stayed as was previously submitted, and with the exception of those 2 amendments that we are proposing. You do have a letter dated November 29th from one of the abutters on behalf of, I think, a number of the concerned abutters in this area, and I'm sure we'll be asked about that previously. So what I'd just like to do is briefly go through the 3 issues that were raised in that letter and just briefly speak to them at this point. This is a letter dated November 29th to the commission. The first one spoke about reviewing the project with regard to cumulative impacts of the development as it should be addressed within section 403 of the regulations. I just want to point out that if the commission finds that the project has no adverse impact, then there simply can be no cumulative impacts of the project. Specifically in 403, and I quote, it says, "But as acknowledged in the Town of Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations, or the bylaw regulations, it's very difficult to accurately assess potential significant cumulative impacts on protected wetland resource areas. Indeed, the best way to protect against cumulative impacts is the maintenance and preservation of an undisturbed buffer zone. See Town of Nantucket Wetland Protection Regulations, Part 4, Section 4.03. Again, we've respected the specific buffer zones from the isolated vegetated wetland with regard to the 25 and the 50 foot, 25 foot no disturb and the 50 foot no build. I think the cumulative impacts section of the regulations speaks to what we would consider typically when we file with NHESP or things like that, and they look at segmenting a project. Obviously, we're giving you the full picture of what this project is at this point. We're not necessarily trying to segment the work. And following the buffer zones, we think we've addressed anything that would fall under that cumulative impact section of the bylaw. There is a reference again to the HDC approval necessary for the pools. Again, this particular project has an HDC certificate of appropriateness for the location of a pool on this particular property. It will be necessary for us to go back to the HDC with regard to any approval that this commission would see in order to complete the process prior to issuance, moving forward with the building department and so forth. The pools are shown as being above grade, if you will, with regard to the flood elevation. The top of the pools are set on the original HDC approvals as being elevated above the flood zone. The change would be they are now confined or hidden within an existing deck system. That would be the only issue that would have to go back and be reviewed by the HDC. I think this issue was spoken to by both the chair and maybe a few of the commissioners at the last meeting, but it was brought up again in the November 29th submittal from the abutters. Final issue on that letter was it talks about pools in the flood zone being inconsistent with the coastal resiliency plan. With regard to that, I'd only just say the coastal resiliency plan does not create an authority that dictates how the commission is to act on amended order of conditions or order of conditions in general. The commission is required to review the proposed projects in light of the requirements and performance standards detailed in the Wetlands Protection Act. In the bylaw regulations, neither has adopted or otherwise speaks to Nantucket's coastal resiliency plan as being an authority that the commission may rely on to deny a pending project. So I hope as briefly as I could address maybe the concerns in the November 29th letter. Again, I think we've spoken about this application in detail previously. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm actually going to beg the commission's indulgence to go first on this, because it seems clear to me that if we approve this, that it almost certainly would be appealed by the abutters on the grounds that it hadn't been to the HDC. And to save everybody a great deal of time, effort, and money, I would propose that you ask the applicants to go before the HDC first before coming back with this. And I don't know what my fellow commissioners feel on this subject, but that would be my advice. Thank you. Yes, Mark. I mean, I realize that this is honored in the breach, but the bottom line is, it is a regulation that Ms. Cohane has emphasized several times. The abutters have emphasized it several times. And Paul, as you say, it's stipulated in our bylaws that you go before the HDC for this, design change. Yes, Mark.
Ian, I support that option of asking the applicant to postpone his application until he has HDC approval. I somewhat feel misled by Paul saying they have HDC approval, but may have to go back. I think they have to go back, and I think I would feel better to have a HD approval in hand before we could actually act on this application. HDC generally does not like above ground pools, but they can approve it if they're so inclined. I think it's important for us to know that. I think that the house is a given. It meets all of our regulations. Paul has been very responsive, or the applicant has been very responsive in us manipulating the pool to get it higher and smaller. It still could be smaller in my view. I don't like all that water being in the floodplain, chemically treated water in the floodplain. I'm having a hard time looking at a no vote just because I don't like the water being in the flood zone when they've met what we think were the requests for our approval. But I think I would feel much better if they came before us with an HDC approval in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I respect your point and don't have any issue with advising the applicant to do that or asking them to do that, it's not our prerogative to require them to. If applicant chooses to close, that's at their own liability. And all applicants close on every permit with the understanding that appeals might be possible. And I think if you really closely read what the town of Nantucket's wetland bylaw says, we're in chapter 136, section 3C. It says must be filed concurrently with or after applications for all other variances and approvals required by zoning bylaw, subdivision control law, or any other bylaw or regulation. We're really going to be debating what the definition of concurrently or after means, because the applicant did apply to the HDC for a project at the location that is materially similar. It's a pool. It's not the exact same pool, but it is a pool. So we're debating on what concurrently means. We're debating if whether above ground pool and a in-ground pool is a substantial enough change to refile with the HCC. I don't think that's the prerogative of the Conservation Commission. Maybe it's the prerogative of our town council, but I think without a legal opinion there, we're debating what concurrently means, and that's not really our job. Thank you.
Yes, Mark, before I
Just a follow-up. I would never be so bold as to make it a prerogative or a requirement. It was my suggestion that they do it to help us along. We could never ask them and demand. We could never demand it of them. We could ask it of them. That was my point, Seth. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying, Mark. That's exactly how I took your comment initially. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with respect to my fellow commissioners and the abutters on the HDC question, I mean, we could go back and forth forever. If the HDC disallows it, then that's the answer. I just sort of from the applicant's perspective and the permitting process, I realize is not perfect, but I wouldn't have a problem moving forward with the it's obvious they have to go back to the HDC, so it's one or the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Seth.
Thank you. And just so everyone's clear, if they go to the HCC and the HCC says, no, we won't allow that above ground pool, then they can come back to us and apply for the in-ground pool. Will they receive that approval from the Conservation Commission? It seems unlikely, but all the permits are tied to each other. We routinely have projects where something is approved by the Concom, then they go to the HCC and the HCC doesn't approve that, and they come back to the Concom seeking to have a project that fits both approval processes. So it'd be a different thing if they didn't apply any application to the HCC, but since an application has been submitted, you know, it's the process is ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Any further comments from commissioners? Yes, Joe. You're muted, Joe.
I believe we approved 2 Mariner Way, which had a very similar situation to 4 and 6. And I don't know what that all means in terms of sending it back to HDC. Would it be easier to have the commission vote on this and send it, and it can go back to HDC, and we won't have to have it cluttering our list next month or the month after?
That would be one approach, Joe. So, yes, Mr. Wood. So,
I would just point out that counsel for the applicant, I would just point out, following up on Seth's comment, I think you're setting, you know, a really confused precedent at this point with what permit you have to actually obtain before you obtain another one. In my permitting around the Commonwealth, commonly some boards of health require septic approval before you go to the Concom, and in some boards, in some towns, you have to do the exact opposite. There's no rhyme or reason to any of it. It's just, that's what you're told. Under the state wetlands regs, it says you just have to apply for all locally obtainable permits. Well, we not only applied for it, we got it approved. So this pool, as revised and as elevated and revised, I find it hard to believe, I think everyone here on the commission find it hard to believe that we're not going to get HDC approval. So this is a red herring completely concerning the Wetlands Protection Act, and any appeal to DEP would be utterly foolhardy and just burning money. And if the opposition wants to file a lawsuit in Superior Court on this, I guess they could, but I think on something as nominal procedurally, and given the language that Seth has stated, I think it's a dangerous precedent where you're just going to be bouncing back and forth, as Mark pointed out, because projects require revisions.
okay,
I don't know what.
You made your point abundantly clear. Thank you very much. So really, I think when I think how long this has taken, it's astounding. Ms. Cohen, do you want to add anything that you haven't said in either your letter or in comments before? And you're muted.
Excuse me, through the chair, can I ask RJ Turcotte to speak in advance of me, and then may I speak after that?
Yes, please, RJ, please keep it brief and, you know, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Golding, RJ Turcotte, on behalf of the Nantucket Land and Water Council. Through the chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Santos a clarifying question. In the alterations to the latest submissions, have the bottoms of the pools been brought to the same height as the first floor of the houses? Thank you.
Paul?
No, we don't feel that that's required and or necessary based on the requirements in the AE flood zone.
Thank you.
The bottom of the pool is set 12 inches above existing grade. Top of the pool is set approximately 2.5 feet above the flood zone of 8.
Okay, any further questions, RJ?
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Santos. And just to follow up on that, from our perspective, we're really looking for the commission here to treat and sort of set a precedent on this project to move the pool to the same height as the house. If it is considered a structure by these regulations and it is in an area that a house would be vulnerable, logic tells us that it is also vulnerable. And the best thing that this commission could do for this resource area is require that the bottom of the pool is at the same height as the bottom of the house, also being a structure. If the engineers can put the breakaway panels, the flood vents into it, great. I know FEMA doesn't require anything but the house to be raised, but it's a federal government branch. The map we're working with is almost 10 years old. We're hoping for an update. But the commission exists as a local board to be able to be more strict, and that's what we're asking for. So thank you.
Thank you, RJ. And Glenn, would you like to reply to that before I go to?
I would just point out, it's just not federal, it's actually the state building code. This, the pool does not have to be. So this isn't just federal, it's state.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cohen, thank you for your patience. But do you have anything to add that you haven't written to us in your letter that we've all read, your letters that we've all read?
Thank you, and thank you for your patience. I just want to emphasize a couple of things. While the developers revised the plan since the last hearing, it still makes no sense to us or the Land and Water Council that these concrete barriers are not at the least the same level above grade as the houses, especially considering these pools are the closest to the wetlands. I'm hearing tons of pushback about us pushing back about the bylaw, saying that they should go back to the HDC. I think it's really disconcerting that on August 31st, the Concom approved the pool for 2 Mariner Way, and we were explicitly told by the HDC that they had to come back, and they never did. And it is really important not to pick and choose on your bylaws. And the fact that they do not have a complete dossier, to me, is a bylaw that should be upheld. So I hate to hear that that is being diminished, because I don't have full confidence that now that it's way above the deck and it's funny looking, that it doesn't have to go back before the HDC. I just want to say that we 10 abutting property owners who have been here since April have not lawyered up, and it's disheartening to think that there is legalese that is going to be spouted on very dated regulations, and we're urging the commissioners to look forward versus looking back and to protect the coastal and wetlands areas of this island. I also think it was disheartening in the last hearing to have Commissioner Plandowski say, I approve 2 and I'm going to approve 4 and 6. Almost like, wait, what? Before you've heard everything? So we're really hoping that Concom looks at this and takes all this into consideration. The pools in a flood zone inconsistent with the CRP, the cumulative impacts of the development, and the fact that it's not a complete dossier. Thank you very much.
Thank you. RJ, is your hand up because you want to say something? Okay. Seth, you put your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first is a question to Paul. I understand it's your opinion that the pool doesn't need to meet the same elevation of the house, which I take, but surely it wouldn't be too hard from an engineering perspective to do that. You know, if it's already being elevated, can it be elevated more? Do you have an answer to that or any thoughts on that?
Through the chair, I'm happy to.
Of course.
Okay. So first of all, let's look at what the house, when we're talking about elevating the house is a full foundation wall. It goes subgrade. It's a full foundation wall with flood vents. What's elevated on the house is not the foundation. It's the first floor elevation. So if the flood zone is 8, the first floor is elevated. What's controlled is the first floor elevation and nothing else. So with respect to the pool, using that same theory, instead of using the full foundation, instead of using a flood vent system, we're elevating the pool above the ground for the passage of storm flow. You then have the pool wall itself, and then the top of the pool in this case, is elevated above the flood zone at the similar to the house. Again, the top of the pool will be set approximately actually a foot and a half above what the house is at. The first floor of the house is at 9. The pool is set above that elevation. So the pool and the pool water itself is actually set higher than the elevation 9 that the first floor of the house is required to be. It's, you know, elevating the walls doesn't change. It's no materially different than what you're doing for the main dwelling of the house. I mentioned at the last meeting too, if I put a garage on that property, the garage can be at grade. That doesn't have to be elevated. That can be at the same grade as existing ground, and the floor elevation of the garage doesn't have to be elevated. So that's a full garage structure that I could put on the property, and I wouldn't have to elevate it any higher than existing grade, provided I have the flood vents surrounding the full foundation wall. So I just don't understand the premise of what that benefit is. The pool, top of the pool, the elevation where the water is all elevated above the flood zone.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I'll speak to the potential benefit in a little bit, but my question is really just from an engineer perspective, is it technically more challenging or less feasible to do that, or is it the same? And
Well,
I understand your comments about
yeah,
whether you think it's required or not, but just trying to figure out if it's really any more difficult. Thank you.
Yeah. At first, what my first thought would be to do it, you'd have to put a full foundation. Similar to the house, you'd have to have a full foundation wall with flood vents to potentially do that, I think, and then support, because now you're elevating that pool up an additional 3 or 4 feet higher than what we're proposing as it is right now. So I mean, I think I don't know if you'd be able to do that on a pier type of helical pile system. You'd have to create, it'd almost be like an addition, an added wing to the house with a full foundation and your flood vents then within that area. That's I'm not a structural engineer, but I would think that's the only way that they potentially could do that. And at the end of the day, if you're still ending up with a pool on the property, understand, you know, what the difference is between the two if you're still going to end up with a pool on the property.
Thank you, Paul. Do you want to follow up, Seth? Do you have any additional questions of Paul or Glenn?
Yeah, just really quickly, thank you, Paul, for that analysis. You know, in my opinion, doing that is actually probably more alteration to the property, going to cause more impacts. So now, instead of having just the open space, now we're having a full foundation and flood vents. And so I see what you know, RJ and others are advocating for here, but I actually think that's more damaging in a lot of ways. Thank you.
You're welcome.
To the chair, could I?
Yes.
To the chair, could I just ask? And I don't want to spend too much more time on this HDC, but just to briefly go through the HDC, there's currently a certificate of appropriateness for 2, 4, and 6 from the HDC for pools on this property. Subsequent to that, there is also approvals from the HDC for the structures. The only really difference that the HDC would be looking at is the issue of the fact these pools were always shown above grade. They weren't shown flush to grade on the HDC applications. So the only really difference is the fact that we're elevating the bottom of the pool with that space underneath. And to be quite honest, none of that would be visible through, you know, from any public way. You wouldn't see those elevated points. They're basically shielded within the confines of a deck. So when we go back to the HDC, you know, it's not like it's an above ground pool that, you know, a round circular aluminum type above ground pool. The pools were shown as being above the grade. It's really, the question is that space that this commission that we've proposed to satisfy the standards that this commission is upholding. And quite honestly, that's not something that the BHDC would be, it's not something anybody's going to see. It's hidden within the confines of a skirted deck.
Thank you, Paul. Mike, do you have something to say? A question, Mike?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I guess, is to Paul. With the pool elevated at a foot, isn't that essentially acting as a flood vent? Water can pass completely under the pool. Am I missing something there?
Well, that's the whole purpose of elevating. Yes, yes. The whole purpose was to do this in a way that you didn't have a full foundation. It was simply that's the whole purpose of elevating it. Yes. But we're doing it with a pier, so you're only getting, it's just an open area as opposed to putting a full foundation wall and then putting flood vents in it. But that's the whole purpose was to satisfy the standards for land subject to coastal storm flowage, and meeting the performance standards with regard to the ability of the land to absorb and contain floodwater.
Okay, so RJ, would you put your hand on or ask a question?
Thank you, Commissioner Golding. Actually, just have a comment. I didn't leave it up that time. I put it back up. I'm in agreement with Commissioner Engelborg that there would be more initial disturbance from having to install some sort of foundational structure. But I think the long-term benefits are much greater if I've been harping on the bottom of the pool instead of the top of the pool, because our concern isn't so much water spilling out into the harbor during a flood event as it is that the structure breaks free and causes damage and ends up in the resource area breaking apart. The reason that a house has to be raised to the height it has to be raised to is because water in a flood just shoves it and breaks it free. And that's why we're advocating for the commission within its rights to have this raised to the same height, the bottom of the pool raised to the same height as the bottom of the house. Thank you.
Thank you, RJ. So, Ms. Cohen, I think we know exactly what you're going to say. So I don't mean to be rude at all, but please, please keep it brief.
I generally try to, and I'm saying that they didn't go back for 2, and it is. We got confirmation from the chair of the HDC that they should have. So whether or not Paul Santos thinks it's been there, it was supposed to go back. And so yes. I think that's important to point out. Thank you.
And thank you. You've made that point. Everybody's heard that point. Mr. Wood has rebutted it. I really think at this point, it's a pity we don't have town council listening. And we've asked Paul if he would consider going to the HDC first, but as Seth made clear, it's not something that we can require. And I see that Frank Stasowski, is that how it's pronounced?
Yes, perfectly, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, a hypothetical question.
Yes.
If we were talking about a fuel storage tank and not a pool full of diesel fuel, would the 2 feet, would the 1 feet be enough? I think, there's a reason why in Mississippi and every place else that the FEMA rules apply and have these elevations of structures up 8 feet. Is so that 8 feet worth of water can pass freely under a structure. So the idea that at 12 inches is going to help it will help it float better is what it will do. Thank you.
So, thank you. Seth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we do specifically have a performance standards that is about fuel tanks in land subject to coastal storm flowage. But basically, without reading the whole thing, it says that tanks should be secured so they cannot float loose. We're not talking about a tank here, but the point of the wetland protection regulations is to minimize impacts to the protected interests in the resource areas. And I do want to say one thing about the coastal resiliency plan. So the coastal resiliency plan is important here, but the coastal resiliency plan is an advisory document, and we're a regulatory commission. And although for years we've been trying to update our regulations to get better definitions of resiliency in there, we still haven't got there, which is very unfortunate and something I'm continuously trying to do as fast as possible. But unfortunately, that leads us into a difficult scenario where the only performance standards that we have in our current regulations that talk about anything related to resiliency is the last regulation, or sorry, the last performance standard in each of the land subject to coastal storm flowage and the bordering vegetated wetland section that just says the commission may impose such additional requirements as are necessary to protect the interests protected by the bylaw. So we certainly have the ability under our regulations to say that there can't be a pool in this area if we can very clearly point out how doing that, how creating that additional requirement is absolutely necessary to protect the interests. But before we do that, we are required to consider conditions or alternatives to projects that would allow the project to advance. So I would be very hard pressed to write a negative order of conditions here solely on the basis of that catch-all requirement, saying that we're able to impose additional requirements if we, haven't really tried to permit something that's built in a way and conditioned in a way to protect the performance standards of those resource areas. I personally am extremely against pools and flood zones. I'm pretty against pools in general, but that's not our job here. Our job is to apply the performance standards of our regulations and be bound by that regulatory process in an attempt to permit projects and condition projects in a way that they can move forward. Sometimes it annoys me. Sometimes I get angry, but we have to set our personal feelings aside to try to permit projects. And this isn't to say that, everyone's going to agree with it or like it. And I really respect the homeowners, the abutting homeowners who have been politically active here and are trying to do the best thing for their neighborhood. And I just think that it's a question of we need to follow what the regulations say rather than what we personally feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. And Ms. Cohen?
I don't think it's about anybody's personal feelings. Did you see the photos that I sent you from the last week? With
Yes.
the standing water?
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Well, then I just don't understand how, you're proud of our personal activism. It's our neighborhood. This is
Ms.
literally.
Cohen, please let's not make any personal comments here. And thank you for the photographs which we saw. And so unless there are any further comments, Paul, what do you want to do here?
I add one comment, and I'll be very brief. To RJ's comment, the plans that are submitted have been designed and stamped by a structural engineer. So they are not, the design has been done and stamped by a licensed professional structural engineer. So that's all I want to add.
Thank you. So do you wish wish to close, or do you wish to continue?
Yes, we wish to close.
Okay. So, Will, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, I do just want to remind you briefly that we're only hearing 4 Mariner Way right now, and we'll have to open and vote on 6 Mariner Way as well.
And thank you for that timely reminder, Seth.
Madam or Mr. Chair, sorry, I'm still used to Ashley. Mr. Chair, if I may remind you that we are not in the notice of intent process. We're in the amended order of condition process. So we can certainly close the hearing, but before we issue the amended order, we'll have to talk about the conditions of this project. We obviously want all of our standard pool conditions and other conditions related to residential development to be put in. So let's not skip that step. Thank you.
And that's an important point. Thank you. So do I hear a motion to close? Joe has so moved. Is someone seconding? Tim seconding? Okay, by roll call vote. Mark Beal.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Pandowski.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye, with Linda Williams recused. So, shall we discuss the conditions now, or shall we wait until we've dealt with 6 Mariner Way? Yes, Will.
I was just going to jump in and say that I have these drafted. We typically do them the next morning, but these are all including the pool and lighting conditions that are standard on any of our applications with pools.
Okay.
So unless there is anything additional.
I don't think so. And so, Paul, is there anything you want to add to 6 Mariner Way that we haven't discussed in 4?
Well, no, I think technically we probably should have to open it and I could briefly, to establish a record, just briefly go through between the two.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay, so again, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors on behalf of the applicant Doherty ACK LLC. This is a project located at 6 Mariner Way. This is an amended order of conditions to permit the installation of a pool elevated above grade within land subject to coastal storm flowage in the buffer zone to an isolated vegetated wetland for 6 Mariner Way. Again, the isolated vegetated is located at 111 Washington Street, majority of which is off locus. The wetland does not meet any wetland definition under the Act, but it is subject to jurisdiction under the local bylaw. The application itself has been submitted to request a pool designed to be approximately 10 foot 6 inches long by 7 foot 2 inches wide. It is elevated at a depth or elevated 12 inches above existing grade. The bottom of the pool will be set at approximate elevation 6 or 12 inches above existing grade, elevation of 5. Top of the pool will be set approximate elevation 10 foot 6 inches or 5 foot 6 inches above existing grade and 2 foot 6 inches above the flood elevation of 8. Pool would be set within a deck system, would be elevated on a helical pile format. And other than that, that is the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments that haven't been heard? All right. So, a motion to approve an amended order of conditions to, and I think that I'd like to discuss that when we look at the orders of conditions, to see if we want to add anything to the standard requirements. So Joe, you move to approve. Who would care to second? Mike, thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If we move to approve now, we can't apply the conditions. We would
Okay.
have to move to approve with the conditions, or we have to move to close and then do the conditions later.
Seth, I don't know what I'd do without you. So I would like, Joe, would you move to close, please? Thank you. And Mike, I take it you are approving. Thank you very much. By roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye, with Linda Williams recused. So there are no requests for determinations of applicability, no minor mods. And so that brings us to certificates of compliance. Day 55R Pulpus Road.
I'm not sure that anyone's on for this one, Ian, but I can present this.
Okay, why don't you present it, Will? Thank you.
All right. So Will Delerba here. This is a COC for 55R Pulpus Road. It's for an order of conditions from 1996. Everything is exactly as it's supposed to be on the plan. There's no continuing conditions on this, and the site was in compliance overall. So recommend approving or issuing the certificate of compliance for this.
Thank you. A motion to approve issuing the certificate of compliance by Mike Mazzarelli, seconded by Joe Plandowski. By roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. So that brings us on to Wellner, 8 Walsh Street. Art, are you on still?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Hi.
This was a project related to some invasive species removal. It was related to construction of an addition on the house, but there was also a condition that required the removal of invasive species, treatment, and then replanting of a disturbed area. And that work has been done. And the work was done by a licensed herbicide applicator, which we've included in the request for the certificate of compliance. You can see there where the property line is, and essentially where the work of the treatment had to stop, and the difference between what's been done and I think improved on this property. So the work is now, I believe, complete in substantial compliance with the issued order.
Great. Thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Or a motion to issue a certificate of compliance? Joe, thank you. Seconded by Mike. By roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. And that brings us on to Lothian.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So that brings us on to Lothian, 6 and 10 Easy Street. And let me see. Will, are you going to take this one?
I'm not sure if Paul Santos was on for this, but it's a pretty simple one. The work was actually never completed and the order of conditions lapsed. I went out there to verify that is true. The work was not completed.
And so then there's no certificate of compliance necessary.
So we need a COC just verifying, there's a box that we check that just says that the OOC has lapsed. And we're verifying that the work wasn't completed. So there was, just because there was an open order, they have to close it out.
So would someone like to make that motion? Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Joe. By roll call vote. Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
I had a sip. Look.
Joe Prandowski.
Aye.
Oh, God.
Aye.
Thank you. Ian Golding, aye. Oh, Lord. Okay, this brings us on to orders of conditions. So, let me see. But the first one is North Liberty Street. 13 North Liberty Street. And
I'll share my screen for these two.
thank you. Seems fairly straightforward.
Yes. So we added the lighting condition and that was it for this one. We have a waiver applied, but that was it.
Okay. Any comments by commissioners? Or you want to make a motion to approve as drafted? Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Mark. By roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. And that, let me see. Did I am a dummy at 77 Eel Point Road. Did we have the?
That one did not.
Did not. Okay.
So we're on to two
Cathcart Road. Yeah. Okay. 2 Cathcart Road.
And we do have this DEP number.
Okay.
But this one, we have included the pool conditions and the lighting conditions. Not sure if there's anything else additionally.
Seems complete. Any comments from commissioners? And seeing none, motion to approve. Thank you, Mark. Seconded by Joe. By roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Pandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. And that brings us on to 96 Squam Road. LLC 96 Squam Road. And I believe there's, let me see, okay.
I think Seth had a comment about the waiver on this one. And I already
Right.
had it drafted as a no adverse impact. I think that may have been a copy paste error in the NOI. Not sure.
So
if
it's as printed then, Will?
Yeah, as drafted.
Any comments from commissioners? Yes, Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the waiver, Will. I don't know if in conditions or in projects like this where we have redoxamorphic features, we want to just call out as an additional finding that the seasonal high groundwater elevation that's mapped is based on redox features. Because I know it's in the hearing, but when people look back and read these and they're wondering why there's no adverse impact, it's because there likely isn't water there. There was just water there at some point in the distant past. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Seth. So can you add that, please, Will? I think that's a very it's a pertinent point.
I'm happy to add that. I'll let you see live if I remember how to spell redoxamorphic features.
I'm sure spell check will make a point of
You
changing
got it.
completely.
You got it.
Come on, guys. I took soil sciences. It was a while ago, but
I think it's fine, just like that.
I think it is, yeah.
And then the waiver speaks for itself.
Cool.
Excellent. Thank you, Seth. So would you like to propose to approve as amended?
So moved.
Thank you. Seconded by Joe. By roll call vote, Mark Beal,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg,
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Joe Pandowski,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. So that brings us on to basically the amended order of conditions for 4 and 6 Marino Way. Do you want to, have you worked on that, Will, or do you want to wait?
Well, believe it or not, they exist, but I am experiencing a technical difficulty with my VPN and I can't get into the O drive right now.
Oh.
So they're not saved locally on my computer, but I always have a backup of the orders. So I can't bring them up, but I know that I've added the standard pool conditions that we have, including the that the water must be trucked off site and then our lighting condition. So I don't know if without seeing that right now, if we can close on that, or if we want to talk about additional conditions, but I can't bring them up on my screen right now.
Well, I don't really.
Dreaded O drive.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
We need anything more than standard conditions unless like any commissioner wants to come up with an additional
I could bring up the standard pool conditions. I don't know if that helps. I think we probably all know them, but
yeah,
if we wanted anything additional, I could note it and have it added in tomorrow morning.
I don't think we do we?
I can't think of anything additional.
No, but not to be that guy. I just don't think we should be approving orders without seeing them or having the public have a chance to see them. You know, it's not in the packet. It's not up on the screen. I think that's bad precedent.
All right.
Good point, Seth.
It is a good point, Seth. So we have what? 28 days for
21 days.
21 days, thank you. So, all right, I guess we'll be visiting it at our next meeting. Revisiting it, I should say, at our next meeting. So that brings us on to other business, approval of minutes, which I must say, in reading them, it made me miss Ashley. And there we go. So a motion to approve. Thank you, Joe. Seconded by Mike. Thank you, Mike. By roll call vote, Mark Beal.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Joe Pandowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye, with Tim Brain absent.
Yeah, abstaining on this.
Abstaining, right. So monitoring reports, any monitoring reports?
0.
Excellent. Enforcement actions? Potential.
We will be hearing 2 next meeting.
Okay. We should gird ourselves. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So then reports from CRAC. Tim?
Nothing new to report.
Okay. CPC?
We're in the middle of we're in the middle of allocating our $3.8 million to the various applications.
Thank you. NP and EDC?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of the meeting focused on ideas to potentially re-envision the membership of NPDC based on town meeting decisions, state house procedures, and internal workings that the NPDC has been trying to do on its own to modernize and hopefully make the commission a little bit more diverse in its aspects and interests and better serve its region. The reason I'm bringing that up now is there is a possibility that in the future, the Conservation Commission may no longer have a seat on the NPDC. This isn't a defined proposal or anything like that, but it has been proposed that it may be better for other conservation interests, or there's also a proposal to have membership based on a sector rather than a specific organization. So somebody that represents conservation could be from any agency or any entity, not necessarily the Conservation Commission. So that being said, I think, I'm just one person on the commission, but I am your Concom representative. And we don't necessarily have to talk about it at this meeting, but if people feel support for that, if they feel against that, they feel that the Conservation Commission should definitely continue on the NPDC, you can direct those comments to staff, who will direct them to me. Again, none of this is proposal at this point, or part of the town meeting or bylaw amendment or anything like that. It's just discussions, but there is some discussion of potentially not having a Concom representative on the NPDC anymore. Thank you.
Okay, Linda, do I see your hand up?
Yep. Having been a member of the Planning Commission and the Planning Board, the only regulatory board that is represented other than us is the Planning Board. The Zoning Board is not on there. Housing Trust isn't on there. The Housing Authority is on there. We have a representative there. I would like to see the Concom stay on there, especially as climate change occurs. I think there's going to be a lot of issues on planning and access and roadways and things that the Planning Commission generally does deal with. So I think the Concom should stay on there. That's my personal opinion.
Thank you, Linda. So I wholeheartedly agree. And I think either we take Seth up on his suggestion and send emails individually to staff, and so I think since it's at a level where it's only being mooted at the moment, that's probably the appropriate way to go about it, rather than anticipating a removal and voting to stay on. How do my fellow commissioners feel on that?
Can I just say one thing, Ian?
Yes, please do.
So certainly when an official proposal to change membership comes to the table, I will update the Conservation Commission at that time. And it's true, it might be a moot point. Maybe the official proposal still has a seat for the Concom, but I just did want to mention it, that there are discussions where alternate futures may exist.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's a very important point, so I'm very glad that you brought it up. And Linda, I'm in complete agreement with you on that one. So, and Linda, the harbor plan, anything further to report on the harbor plan?
Not since our last meeting with the intervention of the holidays. We have another meeting coming up, and I think that's as I said the last time, that's where the rubber is going to meet the road on going through the sections and trying to update them.
Thank you. And Joe,
No
a
meeting.
comment. Okay.
No
All right.
meeting.
Any commissioners' comments? Yes, sir. Seth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm glad that we had this short meeting today, but it reminds me that there's still a few outstanding things that we aren't able to talk about or haven't been able to talk about because of the long meeting agendas. I know the regulations are one that I've mentioned before, but the other is, yeah, thank you. The other is the open space discussion, which we had one meeting on, and I brought to the commission our portfolio of properties that we hold ownership of. And then we were going to discuss what to potentially, if anything, do with those. And especially with town meeting coming up for the spring, you know, if we wanted to consider any type of transfer to other entities like the town or land bank, now would be the time to start drafting those proposals. So I think we should either set a meeting or have our staff talk to other staff who may need to be talked to, like the town manager or the head of the land bank, to see if they even would consider that. But you know, part of it is this bigger discussion about how the Concom wants to position itself in its open space role generally. And then there's a specific discussion on, do we want to be property owners of 3 properties or not? Or should a other entity that's better suited do that? Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. So Will?
Yeah, I just wanted to butt in quickly because when Seth said other town staff that might need to be involved, the thinking about like conveyances or transfers or whatever, the real estate, I forget what his actual title is, but our like real estate specialist has left and the town is hiring a new one. So I'm sure that's something that can be outsourced, but I just wanted to make everybody aware of that I think that's a heavily involved role anytime there's like a property transfer or conveyance.
Well, we have to decide what to do first.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think Seth is saying, let's put it on the agenda so we can have a discussion. And Seth, I have to say that I've forgotten which properties we own which properties we control at this point. So.
Same.
Yeah. So. I wouldn't have thought it would be a very long discussion, would it? You know.
No, I think we just have to talk about that. But yeah, let's get that on the agenda. Sorry, I have to deal with something real.
Okay. So and any staff reports?
Got one. Speaking of the regulation update, I know we had talked, I believe it was the last meeting or the meeting before, but we had spoken about trying to meet in January for that. I have the list of dates. If we're able to nail one down now, that's fine. But I also would be perfectly happy to send out like a doodle poll in the morning so that we can all highlight which days we're available. And then I'll be able to see what day the most commissioners can show up. But just so everyone's aware, the alternate meeting dates that we would set, that would be 5 p.m. So these would be the weeks that we don't have meetings. It would be January 11th or January 25th, and those would be Thursdays at 5. And then our other option would be to use the posted site visit days that are already posted. January 2nd probably won't work for a lot of people. January 16th is a Tuesday, and January 29th is a Monday, and those would be at 3 p.m. But like I said, if everybody would prefer, I can just set up a doodle poll and send it out in the morning or something.
Yeah.
And I can't do any Tuesdays. Just keep that in mind.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Good. So if no further doodles are anticipated tonight, how about a motion to adjourn? Thank you.
Also
Mike.
doodle.
Thank you, Mark. All right, by roll call vote, Mark Peel.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg.
Aye.
Mike Mazzarelli.
Aye.
Ray Pendowski.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye, another good meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Linda. And Ian Golding, aye. So that's unanimous that we shuffle off this electronic coil and meet again in 2 weeks' time. So
Happy strolling, everybody.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Have a
Good
good
night,
night.
everybody.
See you
Thank
all.
you very much.
See you all on Main Street.
Good night, folks.